My message is Lot's lot. Verse 7 of 2 Peter chapter 2. And if he rescued Lot, this is the Lord, a righteous man who was distressed by the depraved conduct of the lawless. For that righteous man, living among them day after day, was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard. If this is so, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and hold the unrighteous for punishment on the day of judgment. We're going to do what Peter did, and we're going to look back at the life of Lot. I'll be reading from Genesis 19, but before we are in Genesis 19, we should know that Lot is the nephew of Abraham, the father of faith. And so Lot was his nephew, and as Lot grew up and Abraham had his herd and Lot has his herd, there became some conflict in the space that they were both occupying. It's kind of like those old westerns where the guys say, this town ain't big enough for the two of us. And then usually they duke it out or something like that. In this particular situation, Abraham said to Lot, okay, well, there's the high country, the low country, and he let Lot pick first. This reminds me a little bit about my mother's favorite dessert, which, of course, in the family is blueberry pie. And there was one piece left, and my brother and I, of course, both wanted it. And so my father said, Chip, you're the oldest, you can cut the pie in half. I said, great, give me that knife, let me cut this in half. And as I'm ready to cut it in half, he said, Jerry, my brother, gets to pick the first piece. At that point, I got out a protractor and made sure that that thing was exactly bisected. So Abraham took his spot after Lot picked first. After that, we fast forward a few years and we find Lot no longer out in the fields, but we see him in the city of Sodom. And it comes across Abraham's attention that the Lord tells him that he's going to destroy Sodom for wickedness. And the Lord goes through a series of interactions with Abraham, where Abraham comes to the Lord and says, will you save the city if there's 50 righteous people? And the Lord says, yes. And then Abraham comes back and says, what about 45 and 40? And you sort of feel like somebody's going back and forth like at a flea market for the price of something. But really what's happening here is that Abraham is understanding and learning how great the mercy of God is. And he ultimately talks him all the way down to a number that he thinks is a safe number, 10. As it turns out, there's not 10 righteous people in the city. There's less than 10, only Lot's family, 4. And so we see here that as we come upon the story, the Lord has already determined to send the angels to the city for the destruction. So if we go to Genesis 19 and verse 1, if we can pull that up, and I'm going to tie my shoe for safety's sake here. All right, here we go. We'll start. Yep, throw that up there. Verse 1, the two angels arrived in Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting at the gateway of the city. We're going to study Lot's life, and we can see that he has some complacency issues. Here we catch him sitting around a lot, and I will try to watch these puns as I go through the message today. We don't know what he was doing at the gates of the city. He might have been praying. He might have been daydreaming. But the angels came in the evening. So often things happen at night. This was the gateway of a city. and there may have been some form of protection there, but no form of protection can keep any city or any person away from God's judgment. So in they come. So it says, when he saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down his face to the ground. He recognizes these aren't ordinary travelers. He says, "My lords," he said, "turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night, and they will go on your way early in the morning." So the angels have taken the form of a man, okay, because they have feet. And so we understand that angels are spiritual beings. I spoke about them a few weeks ago. In this situation, they have the form of a man. Lot comes and says to him, "Hey, why don't you stay the night, and then you can go off in the morning." Now, this is interesting because Lot is implying, or maybe hoping, that they're just passing through and that it's going to be a short trip. You'll notice that Lot doesn't ask. He essentially tells the angels what to do. I think it's safe to understand when we talk about the nature of God that he's under no obligation to tell you what he's up to in your life, particularly when you don't ask him. And they answer him, "Oh, okay, Lot, sure." Yeah, no. "No," they said, "we will spend the night in the square." So the city had a square, and so you can imagine in that day and age that was fairly prestigious. But Lot insisted so strongly that they did go with him and enter his house. It's interesting. On that minor detail, the angels conceded and said, "Fine." Lot prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast, and they ate. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city, both young and old, surrounded the house. This is this idea of how sin can literally try to surround you. And sin spreads like weeds. And it's also interesting that the very young were there, not just the old. And so this particular sin was pervasive in this society. So they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so we can have sex with them." This is unmistakable what they're speaking about here. And this is a situation where Lot has to have some idea that this was a risk. Hence the reason he said, "Stay in my house tonight." Now, to be forcefully solicited like that can result in fear, and that's understandable. Lot, at his best moment here, goes outside to meet them and shuts the door behind them. And so here Lot is showing a great deal of courage. Lot does not know at this point the power of an angel. He has no idea how much power the angels have. So he tries to protect the angels. He's a bit out of his mind. He is absolutely hopelessly overmatched. One man against a whole city of men. He has some honor in him, but he does not handle it well here. He actually handles it terribly here. Sometimes you can approach something, but then you essentially mess it up, even though you started for good intentions. And he said, "No, my friends, don't do this wicked thing. Look, I have 2 daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them, but don't do anything to these men, for they've come under my protection." It's unacceptable what he says here. He absolutely fails on this. We're going to speak about Lot in detail, so I'm just going to say that goes without saying that that's not an acceptable way. He tries to speak to them as his friends, and what do they reply? Get out of our way, they said. This fellow came here as a foreigner, and now he wants to play judge. If you speak up about wicked deeds, be sure they will yell at you and say you are trying to play the judge. The word friend didn't go too far with Lot. And then what does he say? What do they say? We'll treat you worse than them. They keep bringing pressure on Lot and move forward to break down the door. But the men inside reached out and pulled Lot into the house and shut the door. This is the place in the movie where you realize that that kid or that person doesn't have ordinary powers. Okay? Because these men, a mob of men and young boys, are ready to kill and rip Lot to pieces. And the door swings open, and all of a sudden, the power of the angels, 2 angels, boom, pull him in. Just rip him in, slam the door. And we said in Peter what it says here, verse 9, and so it is that the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and to hold the unrighteousness for punishment on the day of judgment. He's rescued Lot. Lot, keep your mouth shut. You're just making it worse. You're messing up. You're saying ungodly things, but God knows you're a godly man, and he's going to rip you out of this situation and protect you. At the same time, you see here what happens to the men. Verse 11. Then they struck the men who were at the door of the house, both young and old, with blindness, so they could not find the door. The word for blindness here is eyes that have been pricked with thorns. And so it's an interesting idea of men so full of lust for each other that their eyes as if they've been pricked with thorns. They're still trying to find the door. This punishment hasn't sent them away at this point, but they're unable to find the door. It doesn't matter for them that Judgment Day is tomorrow. They're still sinning right till the last minute. Some people would rather lose their sight than lose their sin. The 2 men said to Lot, do you have anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, because we are going to destroy this place. The outcry of the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who were pledged to marry his daughters. He said, hurry and get out of this place, because the Lord is about to destroy the cities. But the son-in-laws thought he was joking. Sometimes you can warn somebody and they can laugh at you, but it's really they just don't want to give up the sin that they have. And it's hard to not imagine that they weren't afflicted and affected with this same situation. And so the way in which they're jeering when they should fear means the destruction will come to them. Verse 15, with the coming of dawn, the angel urged Lot, saying, hurry, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished. It's amazing to me that as next morning sets in, Lot he hasn't left the city yet. He hasn't left the city, and it's possible that his wife has weighed in. It's possible that he got up in the morning and he just thinks it's all a bad dream. Because verse 16 says, when he what? Hesitated. He literally is hesitating. He's seen the power of the angels. He sees that all these men are blind now. The men grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and his 2 daughters and leave them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. So there's 2 angels. We've got 4 hands. One angel has Lot and his wife. The other angel has his 2 daughters. This is the amazing thing. Faith is always trying to save others. The angels had 2 hands, 4 in total, and they saved 4 people. Right to the end, the Lord was merciful, even though he was only saving 4 people. And then as soon as they were brought out, one of them said, "Flee for your lives, don't look back, and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee from the mountains or you will be swept away." Elder Artie gave a message on this, so I'm going to stop reading here, except to say that the wife looked back, turned into a pillar of salt. The entire city was destroyed, as was Gomorrah with it. And so I want to speak a little bit about Sodom before I speak about Lot. And I want to read a little bit more about Lot's life after Sodom and Gomorrah. First of all, Sodom. The sin here is unmistakably homosexuality. The men are blinded in their eyes, and we see that the punishment that comes upon them is ultimately the judgment of God. I think that there are some steps that you see with someone who is very brazen in any sin, where first they commit an evil act. Second, they boast about it to people who are also committing those acts. Third, they justify what they did and defend their conduct. Fourth, they influence other people to do the same thing, especially young people. 5, they no longer hide their sins. And 6, they publicly celebrate it. And that's exactly what is happening in our society today. But that is not what the message is about today. I have spoken about this at length before. Societies that openly flaunt sin are under God's judgment. But I want to speak a little bit about Lot and try to see if I can get some lessons that will apply to us, because he's in a bit of an enigma, as we'll see in a little while. But why would Lot be in such a wicked city? And Peter speaks highly of him here, that he was a righteous man. Sin had invaded that city, but God had found Lot was a righteous man. And so what we have to understand about Lot is that Lot was somebody who was trying to live a godly life. And he was somebody that was making an impact or an impression on the people, even if it's just not something that has the results that he wanted. He was a witness of truth and integrity. If you want to have true virtue, it can never be a passive thing. It will always have to stand up to a trial. If you want to be the strongest person lifting a weight, you will never get there by doing isometrics. You know what isometrics are? It's like those muscle guys when they flex. I don't want to do this in front of you, but you know, that's isometrics. Just flex your muscle. Resist against yourself. No, if you want to be the strongest guy, you have to push against heavyweights. You want to be the strongest woman, you have to do the same thing. And so this idea of being a righteous person doesn't mean just abstaining from things that are sinful. It means being virtuous in the face of opposition. And this is what Lot was able to do. He was able to be righteous in a city that was so wicked. And so sometimes the best lilies thrive among the thorns. And so I want to acknowledge him as Peter did, that he was able to maintain himself at that time in his life. There's an old Aesop's fable about the north wind. Look at this thing. It came off again here. Somebody's going to have to teach me how to tie my shoes better. Double knot them. I'll work on that. We have the north wind and the sun in this Aesop's fable, and they're each trying to determine which of them is the stronger of the two. You may have heard this fable before. They decide to do it by a man who has a jacket on. And whoever can get the man's jacket off will say, I am the stronger of the two. The north wind goes first. The north wind is the coldest wind, of course. When we get Arctic wind here, it's very cold. It's very harsh. And so the north wind blows against the man with the cloak. It starts to open up. What does the man do when that happens? That's right. He pulls it closer. He holds one end with one side and one end with the other, and he wraps himself tight around it. He wraps it tight around him and doesn't lose it. The sun's turn is next. The sun comes up with a gentle, welcome sun for that man who had been so cold. And as the sun gets higher and the humidity rises, the man unbuttons his cloak. And as the sun starts to hit beyond noonday sun, where everything around the man is warm and hot, what does he do? But he takes his jacket off. This is a spiritual principle I think we can apply to ourselves. That seldom do people fall away because of persecution of their faith. People are much more apt to fall away because of complacency. Because everything's fine in my life, I don't need God, and you take the jacket off. So virtue is not proven in times of peace, but in moments of friction. True character is defined by resistance. A soldier guarding his post cannot prove he's brave unless the post is attacked. But then we come to this here. We come to this next story in, I'm going to jump down to verse 30. I gave you guys something different, but we're going to go all the way to chapter 19 of Genesis, verse 30. So Lot has escaped, and he's living in a cave. He was first in a city, and I'm sure he felt unsafe, so he's living in a cave. So Lot and his two daughters left Zoar and settled in the mountains, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. He and his two daughters lived in the cave. One day the older daughter said to the younger, "Our father is old. There's no man around us to give us children, as is the custom all over the earth. Let's get our father to drink wine and then sleep with him and preserve our family line through our father." 33, that night they got their father to drink wine, and the older daughter went up and slept with him. He was not aware of it. She lay down, and when she got up, the younger sister does it. They become pregnant. One of them, the older one, becomes the nation of Moab, and the younger one becomes the nation of the Amorites. And they become a wicked nation that essentially torments Israel. Now, there's no excuse again here for what's happening in Lot. We can make a few points, though, about the drunkenness and what happened with Lot when he was drunk. We see this idea in people that Lot was able to escape the fires of Sodom, which were outside of him, but he was not able to escape the fires from alcohol within him. And the greater enemy for us is always going to be within us. It's going to be what we put inside of ourselves, not what is outside of us. And so we see here that he drinks, he gets drunk, then the sin of incest, which they did not have the 10 Commandments or the books in the Bible at that point. This is no excuse for Lot. My point is that he sinned against nature. He sinned in a way that was unacceptable. I don't excuse him that it mentions that he wasn't aware of it. He certainly chose to have some hand in getting drunk. And this is something that happens with drunkenness, is that somebody who's lived a virtuous life can suddenly throw that away. The old question of, well, somebody who's angry when they're drunk, is the alcohol making them angry, or is that anger in them and coming out? Both. Anger and somebody absolutely will come out from alcohol. But even somebody who's not prone to that can become angry with alcohol. If you abstain from drunkenness, you abstain from 100 sins that come directly from it. You have saved yourself. If you resist this one sin, you escape many. But I really want to take a moment to just really kind of think about this sin of Lot. Like, we had this experience with Noah, and now we have it with Lot. And they're described as righteous people. And yet there's these things that happen that just hurt and affect so many people. And a great tree, when it falls to the ground in the woods, never falls alone. It never falls alone because inevitably it's going to knock down a bunch of young and healthy trees around it, or the underbrush, or whatever is near it, and kill that too. And so we see that certain people, leaders in churches, fathers and mothers, that when they sin, they hurt so many people beyond just themselves. You know, there's just something here where Lot does it twice, too. How many times those of us who have had an addiction or a sin that we're battling in our life say we're not going to do this again? How many times will you say, I will not drink again, right after you got drunk? How many times will you say, I won't gamble again once you're broke, and then you get another paycheck? We have this idea of self-flattery. We have this idea that after we've had our fill of a sin, that the devil says, okay, that's a reasonable stopping point. But then it quickly comes back to us again. And what's the solution to this? The solution to this is, of course, Jesus Christ, the one who lived a perfect life. And when I was trying to understand Lot, and I thought about how Peter described Lot as a righteous man tormented, I started to think about Peter. That Peter did not want to define Lot by the worst moment in his life. But he wanted to define Lot by those years where he lived faithfully. And you know that the Moab nation, though wicked, produced a daughter named Ruth. And do you know that Ruth married Boaz, a Jew, who was the father of Jesse, who was the father of David? That Ruth was the grandmother of David, and David was the ancestor of Jesus Christ. And that the Lord sometimes raises a holy seed from the drunken bed of fornication. And the sweetest of flowers have been found in the most enclosed gardens, even in the wild forest they have been found. Have the worship team come up. God knows how to rescue godly people. Even sometimes before they are born. And so I just put myself in Peter's shoes, looking back at Lot and speaking about this moment in his life where he did the right thing. And Peter put an exclamation point and said, remember Lot for that moment when he was faithful in Sodom, tried to protect the angels. Remember him for that. And you know, I think one of the reasons that Peter did that is that he could relate to Lot. I suppose Peter didn't want to be remembered just for the 3 times he denied Christ, even to a little schoolgirl. I suppose that Peter didn't want to be remembered for just the time that he cut off the servant's ear. I suppose that Peter didn't want to be remembered for the time that he told Christ not to wash his feet. I suppose Peter didn't want to be remembered just for the time that he told Christ that you don't need to go to the cross. And that when we think of Peter, one of the 3 apostles closest to Christ, I think that Peter identified with Lot. Because my big point is, my last point, is that God saved Lot in Sodom even though he knew he would sin again. And isn't that the God that we know, that knows how to rescue godly people and show mercy? And that this was not the full character of Lot's life, and that he chose, sometimes unwisely, but like Peter learned, he can be an example to us of being in a place and maintaining faith, and losing his wife and losing everyone around him. And so that's what I meant about the enigma Lot. And you know, we're all enigmas, aren't we? The only one who lives a pure and spotless and sin-free life is Jesus Christ. And he's the one that we worship. As I've said multiple times before, there are no heroes of the Bible except for Jesus. Abraham, Noah, Lot, these men are flawed men, but they were people of faith. They will be in heaven. And that gives us hope now, doesn't it? Who are no different. Let this be true in our lives. We're going to go on to other topics, but I wanted to spend some time on this, and I hope that it causes you to reflect as it causes me to. Get the worship team to come up. We'll have the elders, Sister Sophia, who want to provide prayer. If you need prayer for anything, you can come forward, and then we'll close down. I tried to keep it short here.